Paddington is a 2015 children's movie directed by Paul King. Although Paddington may seem like a lighthearted story for kids, it is actually one of the most profound pieces of leftist media produced in the 21st century. It discusses social issues from a revolutionary perspective. These issues include neocolonialism, the war on drugs, imperialism, racism, and more modern issues like the prison industrial complex and the plight of immigrants and refugees in foreign countries. Paddington opens with a black and white scene depicting a stereotypical European explorer during the height of imperialism. This first scene clearly establishes the movie as a harsh critique of colonialism and its consequences on the modern-day world. The Bears and King's radical film represent the resilient natives, indigenous people, and other oppressed people groups throughout the world. This first scene is also when the bears get introduced to marmalade, a dark metaphor clearly alluding to the history of drugs and opium as a tool of colonialism and imperialism. In this scene, the explorer also points guns at the bears. This is clearly another allusion to the violent past of colonialism. Marmalade is shown throughout the movie to have an addictive quality. In one scene, Paddington attacks his grandfather in anticipation after learning that the oranges are ripe for marmalade making. This is clearly the action of a drug addict. This draws allusions to the opium trade in China. Faced with economic losses, the British Empire devised a cruel plan to weaken Chinese power and to rob China of its wealth. By selling highly addictive opium throughout China, the British Empire made the Chinese people very dependent on opium to get profits. This caused immeasurable misery across the nation. Through this allusion, Paul King is telling the audience that it is not the fault of the drug users for using drugs, as the drug trade has been weaponized by imperialism for decades and centuries. Further on in the movie, Paddington is forced to leave his home due to a devastating earthquake. This is obviously a reference to the circumstances and events that forced refugees to leave their home countries. This scene specifically draws parallels to the 2010 Haitian earthquake. Haiti was also a neo-colonial state still recovering from the legacy of colonialism. King cleverly tells the audience in this scene that the effects of colonization have left states unable to care for their citizens in times of crisis. This leads to immigration to developed countries such as the UK. Paddington ends up in the UK. When Paddington arrives in the United Kingdom, he is isolated, ignored, clearly unwanted in this new unfamiliar country. Eventually, he is adopted by a family named the Browns. The isolation does not stop there though. He is mocked and scrutinized because of his culture and beliefs. For example, there's a scene where Paddington is criticized by the Brown family because he causes a mess in their bathroom. This scene epitomizes the ignorance that ordinary citizens have towards the culture of refugees and immigrants. Paddington clearly has never used a bathroom before, as he comes from native bear culture in the jungles of Peru, but he is still mocked by the family. The film also brilliantly explores how the justice system treats immigrants, but we will discuss this in the next section. One crucial scene used to examine the topic of crime is when Paddington is almost captured by the story's main antagonist, the daughter of the explorer from the beginning of the movie. She's obviously a metaphor for the legacy of neocolonialism. In this scene, Paddington struggles with the unfamiliar surroundings of the Brown family household, with all of its Western appliances and tape. Eventually, Paddington gets tangled up in the tape. When Paddington is startled by the entrance of the antagonist, Paddington sets off a series of unfortunate events which ultimately leads to a large fire. Afterwards, he is immediately blamed for this incident as he is unable to describe who the intruder was. Instead, he uses terms like the elephant to refer to the gas mask that the antagonist was wearing. How is Paddington supposed to know about the existence of gas masks? After all, he is from the darkest Peru, and he has no prior contact with technology. With this scene, Paul King masterfully communicates how immigrants are often blamed for crimes they did not commit, because of the social stigma largely caused by the haunting legacy of colonialism. This haunting legacy is represented by the main antagonist, as mentioned before. Additionally, the scene also conveys the language barrier that exists when refugees arrive in foreign countries. Paddington's addiction to marmalade and his subsequent arrest in the sequel draw parallels to the war on drugs. Through this, Paul King is also saying that the war on drugs is a legacy of British colonialism, and the opium trade, seen as marmalade, is an allegory to opium.